The Oscar
goes to
Flow.
An indie film just won an Oscar over Hollywood. The animated feature film Flow won the award for Best Animated Feature of 2025, which surprised a lot of people because this independent movie beat out Pixar's Inside Out 2 and DreamWorks' The Wild Robot for that title, which was a massive upset because not only were these Hollywood studios beaten by a small team of 40 3D artists, but we all usually expect this Oscar to go to either Disney or Pixar. Fun fact, out of the 24 Oscars that's happened ever since 2002, Pixar and Disney claimed 15 of them. That's more than half, only losing a few years in between to the likes of movies like Shrek, a classic, Into the Spideyverse, a new classic, and Studio Ghibli films like Spirited Away. All of those are classics. So those are tough beats, and most of those other years, they at least got the nomination. So it's safe to say Disney and Pixar has the Hollywood animation scene on a chokehold, and they have for some time now. This news is a few weeks old at this point because the Oscars are like 3 weeks ago, but I wanted to talk about it because one, I love animated movies, and two, this is a unique situation because Flow's win sparked a lot of dialogue online. Mostly because Flow was entirely made and animated in Blender, and 100% free 3D animation software. This sparked a big conversation on whether these big studios with these big budgets and these really expensive 3D programs, whether that's necessary to make a commercially successful 3D movie. And now, because of Flow, we know the answer. No, not really. Because Flow just passed $20 million at the global box office. Although, yes, they used an entirely free program to make this movie, they still had a fairly sizable budget. They raised about $4 million for this movie, which to someone like you and me is a lot, obviously. But compared to Hollywood, that's just a fraction. Assumably, none of that money went towards 3D animation software because Blender is free. Whereas compared to the other industry standard software like Maya, 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, where the cost is about like $1,000 just for one license. Do the math, if you want a whole production team to have access to that same software, no doubt they saved a lot of money not doing that. So what did they use this $4 million budget for, if not for the 3D animation software? Resources were still needed to make this movie, which is obvious, right? They had a whole production team of about 50 people that included animators, concept artists, modelers, musicians, sound designers, and like a core team of about 20 people all working on a film that took about 5.5 years to make. That's a lot of salaries to cover over a long period of time, just to tell a story about a lovable cat. Although there's something to be said about crew size, because Gintz made another feature film before this called Away back in 2019, where he entirely animated it on his own, which is crazy to think about because he actually did that. That's a little nuts, but that's actually really inspiring.
So I learned by making these shorts, but also my first feature Away, where I did kind of do everything on my own, and that was my way of learning all these different tasks. So eventually, and that I have this chance now to work with the team, it helped me to kind of understand what everyone's doing.
But for his second feature, Flow, he decided to expand the production from just a solo act into an entire team project. And I can see how, when doing so, he needed to expand his budget a bit as well. But considering this was still an indie production, he still didn't have the Hollywood-sized cash flow, so Blender being free to use actually helped him in this specific case. In a Reddit AMA, Gintz even admits how advantageous Blender being free was, stating that Blender has opened up a lot of doors for filmmakers and artists around the world. We couldn't have made this film on a budget like this without it. And I'm sure that there will be many incredible independent animated films being made now. And if you've watched this movie, this wasn't even a move to cut corners either. No artistic quality or integrity were compromised simply because they decided to use a free program over a paid one. In fact, this movie looks just as beautiful as Inside Out 2 and The Wild Robot and every other nominee this year. You really don't need a quote-unquote industry standard program to make movies, or even taking it a step further, you don't even need it to win an Oscar. When you even flip the script, you can even claim that Blender, the freemium software, is actually industry standard now. Either point has an argument with Flow being front and center as the evidence. why go and buy a Maya when you have Blender at home? Is there really a difference between all these different animation programs? Yeah, like yes and no. Although yes, Maya, 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, Blender, these are all 3D animation programs, meaning that anyone can download them right now and start animating some 3D characters into some 3D scenes. But I thoroughly believe, despite that unifying similarity, they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. And it's because of that it's actually up to the artists to choose which program is best for them. I use both Blender and Cinema 4D. Both are amazing and can produce Hollywood quality renders, but Cinema 4D has a leg up on motion graphics and simulation, and Blender has a leg up on out-of-the-box renders and its online community, which I think is invaluable, to be honest. In Cinema 4D, I find it really easy and intuitive to do simulations and text animations. With its tools and UI, you can achieve some really cool abstract motion and simulation techniques quickly and easily. The interface is really easy to understand and it flows really well. Blender can also do abstract motion graphics and simulations, but I find it a bit more tedious and less streamlined to do so. Cinema has GPU simulations and intuitive motion graphics tools that make it faster to do those things, while Blender simply just does not. But one thing Blender has going for it is its massive online community. It's a program, it's free, so the barrier to entry is super low, meaning there are a lot of people online and a lot of online content for Blender. If you ever wanted to learn anything Blender related or has something to troubleshoot or just wanted to learn it, just Google it and 99% of the time you'll find some info or a whole ass Blender guru channel to look for. Even better, a lot of people's first baby steps into 3D animation actually comes from Blender Guru's donut tutorial, which teaches you the basic of 3D animation completely for free. You can watch it on YouTube right now. On the flip side, with Cinema, I found its online community a little less present. Yes, it does exist in some pockets on the internet, like with School of Motion and Cineversity, but with Cinema being a paid program, it's definitely at a disadvantage for sure. Although you could argue that means the online content for it would be better quality, but that's an entirely different combo for another day. Both programs can do all the same things with some amazing results. Both can achieve photorealism and slick animations. They both can animate characters. They both have modeling tools. They both have motion graphic capabilities. Really, in the end, which one you decide to use just comes down to preference. Do you want to pay $1,000 a year for a program? Do you want more motion graphic animation or more character animations? Is it just you needing access, just you, or is it an entire team? And if so, does your budget support that? These are all questions that will help you decide what program to use, but for Gintz and the Flow team, Blender was their answer. And if they needed to add another team member, they would have to integrate them into their Blender workflow as well, which would be easier to do since they have a whole internet to look from, a Blender Guru channel to watch, and the program is free, all to gain knowledge from. Generally, I believe in using the program you want to use over the one you feel like you have to use. And ideally, and more realistically, really, you'll probably end up using multiple programs anyways, because again, strengths and weaknesses. I found sometimes mixing and matching, min-maxing these 3D programs can lead to the best results at the end of the day. For example, last year, and this is a personal project I did, I animated a 3D mock soda commercial in 3D just for fun. It was fun. And I used Blender for it, and I didn't use Blender's liquid simulation. I actually used a third-party dedicated program specific for liquid simulation called LiquidGen. And it worked like magic. You can go ahead and check that out if you want to see how it turned out. It worked like a charm, and I felt like that program did way better at liquid sims than Blender can. It was easier to use too. Professional studios have already adopted this idea of mixing and matching programs though, and they use it to this day. And in fact, it's because of that idea that this year's Oscars wasn't even Blender's first introduction into Hollywood. Across the Spider-Verse actually used Blender in their production for their comic book styled stencil work. Also, not to mention, they had a whole ass Lego scene in the movie that I'm pretty sure was entirely made in Blender by a kid. The movie itself, however, was mainly animated in Maya though, but the combination of these two programs were used to create the amazing visuals you see before you. And to be honest, I feel like blending programs is actually the ideal scenario anyway. So I don't find Blender's involvement in this year's Oscars and in an Oscar win, all that surprising. In fact, I feel like this kind of shows what industry standard actually means. That is evolving. Before, industry standard always had this out of reach connotation where only the biggest and best funded studios can really obtain it. But honestly, filmmaking has become much more democratized over the years, and the accessibility has become more open, and I, for one, am loving it. You don't need an $11,000 red camera to film a movie anymore. You can just use your iPhone like they did with the movie 28 Years Later. You don't need to pay for Maya to animate a 3D movie either. You can just use Blender and get started at home like they did with Flow. This new age of film accessibility is super encouraging because it means we should be getting new films to be made, new stories to be told, and new ideas to be shared, as opposed to these constant reboots and live action remakes we're getting force-fed by these big Hollywood studios. The filmmaking nerd in me yearns for more unique stories. It's just harder for the bigger Hollywood studios to commit to because they have money and they have investors that gave them this money. They want a return on their investment. And the reality is we're both all statistically more likely to pay to see a live action Lilo and Stitch than we are to take a chance on a completely new movie with a completely new story with a completely new director we've just never heard of. But even despite that, we are in the age of film accessibility. Anyone can make a movie, whether it's solo, with a team, with a big budget, small budget, whatever, whenever. We need to continue to show love to our indie filmmakers. And as we do, free Hollywood quality programs like Blender and even like DaVinci Resolve, these programs will continue to grow and expand our indie filmmakers' opportunities to break into Hollywood, just like how Gintz and his team did with Flow. Flow's well-deserved Oscar win is paving the way to more breakout indie artists to do the same thing that they did. And I, for one, am here for it. So Blender snagging its first Oscar win thanks to Flow and the amazingly talented team behind it is not too surprising to me, but it's still f***ing awesome. And in fact, I think we'll see more of Blender as time goes on. Unless they ask us to pay for it all of a sudden. Then in that case,